Hello, my name is Pedram Danesh-Mand, and today I would like to introduce you to these sessions of 1310. And these interactive sessions, they're trying to capture 30 years of experience in 10 minutes, which is quite exciting and valuable. For today, I have a pleasure to be with Chris Luck. And for people who work within the infrastructure and especially transport sector in Australia over the last 10 to 15 years, Chris is probably one of the top names in mind. So in terms of experience, Chris is his achievements in the last 10 to 15 years, including the former Deputy Director General Transport Projects in Transport for New South Wales, including the delivery of more than 400 projects with a value of $12 billion, together with the growth in organisation from 60 to 900 staff, and in annual turnover from 200 million to 2.5 billion dollars. Amazing, quite amazing achievement and journey. And I'm personally so excited to hear your experience in 10 minutes. Thanks for your time today. It's a great pleasure to be here and listen to your experience in 10 minutes. And I think that's quite valuable for us in Australia, but also globally for our profession. So it's up to you.
Thank you, Pedram. That's very kind of you.
Excellent. So as a first question, Chris, development and delivering the infrastructure projects generally take years from initiation to completion. In your view, what are the top key critical milestones along the way?
So I think, Pedram, to answer your question, I'm going to start with a sort of government perspective from a government project, because government as the client in these projects has a process that is really quite important, and it has all the key steps laid out.
Sure.
First one is the justification. Why are we going to be delivering a project? In fact, it's even earlier than that. What is the service need that we have that then becomes a project? So we might need more hospital beds, or we might need schools, or we might have a road problem, but we don't know necessarily that the road or the hospital or the school is the right solution. We're not at a project level. So
Sure.
the service justification is the first position. The second key milestone leading on from that is the business case. We must have an accurate and a proper business case. And so often this is rushed through, because the business case will define what the deliverable is. It'll define where the funding's coming from, where the finance is coming from. It'll define the service that we're going to be providing. And so that becomes more or less our starting point for the project. The next critical part is the procurement. How are we going to be delivering this project? And a subset of that is the contracting strategy. Which form of contract are we going to use? So delivery strategy and contract strategy. Clearly, the second last but important part is the actual delivery, the people that are going to be doing the delivery. And the last part is the lessons learned.
Sure.
When the project's finished, what did we do well? What did we not do quite so well? How can we improve what we're doing?
Thank you. Excellent. So Chris, you mentioned about the earlier stages of project initiation and business case. Based on the performance, in your view, what's wrong with the decision making for infrastructure projects at the earlier stages?
Let me say something. This is not, I don't think, particularly controversial, but I think in Australia, governments have got actually quite a lot better at making the right decisions about projects. Very, very early in my career in Africa, I was the delivery contractor for a pulp and paper mill in deepest, darkest Africa. And that's the only project that I've been involved with in my career that actually failed, because the project was the wrong project.
Sure.
We built the project, we spent hundreds of millions of US dollars many years ago, and it never worked. It never produced paper. So that was a failure. But in Australia, we live in a democracy where governments make decisions about projects, and the citizenry respond to those decisions through the ballot box. And if they don't like them, the government changes and falls. What makes our life in Australia in quite difficult in major projects, perhaps not difficult, perhaps complex, are things like the politicisation of infrastructure, where a government chooses to proceed with a piece of infrastructure and a subsequent government cancels it. That makes life quite complex.
Sure.
The 24-hour news cycle, the 10-second sound bites that cause politicians to make announcements far too early in the project life cycle before the proper information is there.
Sure.
In Australia, we have an active citizenry, we have social media, we have lobby groups, focus groups, and this makes life more complex in making decisions for projects. And finally, a word that I heard just this morning for the first time, lawfare. We run a position of lawfare in Australia where the law can be used to stop projects or change project decisions being made. And that makes for a complex life.
Wow, interesting. So Chris, let's assume that we select the right project for the values and benefits and needs of the society. In your experience, but still we are still witnessing some projects that they are over budget or late, or we cannot deliver them within the risk profile that we are interested. In your experience, what are the top key reasons of failure for those projects?
Three.
Perfect. Good.
Scope, and scope.
Right.
Now, let me come back on that.
Sure.
First, scope. The sponsor hasn't properly defined what the scope of the project is. In their mind, they might know what the service delivery is, but they haven't quite worked out what the scope of the actual deliverable project is going to be.
Sure.
And what that leads to is a very poor business case, which I mentioned earlier, where the funding isn't appropriate, where the delivery strategy isn't appropriate for the scope that's been defined. Poor community consultation, because the government's gone out and consulted on a particular scope, but that's not what's eventually going to be delivered.
Sure.
Second scope, the delivery entity, the contractor, hasn't understood in the tender process what the scope is that it's meant to be delivering. And so the tender price is too low. Or the program is too short because he didn't understand the complexity of what he was delivering.
Sure.
So the sponsor's got the scope wrong, the delivery agency's got the scope wrong, and then during the course of the project, there are changes and variations to scope, which cause delay, an increased cost, and they're caused by both parties. They're caused by the sponsor changing his mind about what he wanted, or the sponsor and the contractor together having to develop a scope because it wasn't clear in the first time, or indeed the contractor changes the scope off his own bat. I did a project a few years ago as a contractor where we tendered the project on a road project with Super T beams, and we decided to change to match cast to precast. It cost a fortune in time and dollars. So scope, scope and scope. And if you needed something else, people.
Wow. Interesting. So Chris, as a last question, is that you're one of our keynote speakers in the next coming Project Controls Conference in Sydney in September 2017. And you mentioned about the scope, and people. What do you want to share with us in the conference?
So thank you for inviting me to speak, which is a great thing. I'm a quantity surveyor, and as a practitioner, I understand time, cost, safety, quality. I understand the metrics. I understand how we control those things. But projects in my lifetime have changed. We started off with simple projects, and then we got quite complicated projects, and then we went into complex projects and programs, and now we're into, I think, wicked projects. And I want to explore some of those things in the sense of project controls, because project controls need to expand to cope with the type of project that we currently have. And my premise is that the missing project control is culture. and that the sponsor, the deliverer, the end operator have a marked impact on the outcome of the project depending on their culture and how that culture was formed right at the beginning for the project, and how as project controls professionals we can measure that.
Excellent. Great to hear that, because in the conference we put it on 3 streams, and although we will have some new technology in terms of delivering and controlling the projects and the process as well, but there is a big portion of the conference that we want to focus on the culture and people, and I'm really glad that you mentioned about it. Chris, is there anything else that at the end you would like to highlight to our members?
No, except only that your title of 30 in 10, in my case, should be 40 in 10.
That's the minimum. So, absolutely. Chris, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. We look forward to see you in September, and thanks for your contributions to the industry and profession.
Thank you, Pedram.
Thank you. Look forward to see you in September if you are. Otherwise, keep in touch. Thanks. Bye.